Hey, welcome back to another My Sales Day podcast. I am Michael Hess, and I am delighted that you are here. In this show, I sit down with Lawrence Horne from across the pond as we discuss meeting management. Given how the conversation progressed, one could call it a show about conversation management. While Lawrence needles me for my steadfast devotion to using agendas that guide buyer pitch meetings, we are both in violent agreement that buyers today do not want to see your decks, nor feel like they are being pitched. So that means there's enormous strain and stress on you to manage a productive conversation for the buyer and, of course, you and your company. I know you're going to enjoy the banter, and I know you're going to pick up some best practices from my visit with Lawrence. Thanks for being here. Sales is hard, brutally hard, and it's messy. Welcome to My Sales Day, a podcast by sellers for sellers. I'm your host, Michael Hess, and it's my job to make sales less messy for you and make sure that by listening to this show, you get skill ideas and action items to help your sales career. You're gonna get some hugs too. Yes, hugs. You need support, and you don't often get it from inside your org. And you certainly don't get it from the street. I aim to make your time here educational, inspirational, and actionable. So let's get into it. Lawrence Horne, welcome to the My Sales Day podcast. How are you today, Lawrence?
Very good, Michael. It's already dark here, and I know this has been a long time coming, which I'm sure you're going to reference.
Yes, I've been chasing you for about a year plus, but you know what? You've been busy doing sales stuff, and that's very admirable and understandable. So I appreciate that. For the listener, can you tell us where you are right now?
Yes, you mean in terms of location?
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm in rather dark United Kingdom, an hour south of London. Live in Hampshire in the countryside, and it's been raining for the entire day. So for those who want it demystified, that is what can happen in the UK.
Well, it does kind of look like on the video screen for those watching that I'm in a bright, sunny locale and you are in a dark cave. But our hearts are sunny and our minds are sharp, and we're here to have some fun on the My Sales Day podcast. So welcome. I am really excited you are here. Actually, it is truthful. I've been chasing you for a year plus, but you know, you have been running fast, as are most people who listen to this show. Anytime anyone can devote time to this podcast, it is appreciated, even our guests like you. Hey, in a moment, we're going to jump right in and hear your Hall of Fame sale. That's a really important starter to this particular show because the listeners out there want to know how you did it, what skills you used, and how you applied all those skills to your advantage. But first, I want to introduce today's macro topic. You and I agreed that we're going to talk about meeting management. Actually, we could call it conversation management because you and I are going to get very gritty talking about things like storytelling, verbal skills, how to pick up cues by the buyer, and where to take those in actual meetings. I mean, you and I know these days we get so little time in front of the buyer that we really have to plan meticulously for all of those particular interactions. So meeting management is the agenda today. We're going to hear a little bit about some of your stories and some skill lessons that you've learned over the years tied into that. And then we're going to end with headwinds, turbulence, because I always think it's important for the listener to hear from you any recommendations on how you deal with the pressure, because Lord knows it is a very high pressure vocation that you and I have chosen. So how's that sound? Good agenda?
Sounds awesome. That's coming from the professional. I would expect nothing less.
Well, I didn't flip anything on you, did I? It's everything you expect. So, all right. Hey, we want to hear your Hall of Fame sale. So please tell us in a couple minutes, what is the sale you are most proud of? And of course, because this is a show about skills, what are the skills you used?
So the particular example that really sticks in my mind actually goes back to quite early on in my career. So my career's been through print, early into digital, but I've worked for publishing houses, but back to Haymarket Publishing and working, hence the picture behind me, in an area that is a real passion of mine in cars. Started off in Autocar magazine, which is a well-known publication in the UK. It's a weekly magazine for Haymarket Publishing. And there were a couple of components which led to me making this sale. One, and I've been thinking about it a lot recently, was my competitive spirit and just the innate nature of me. You know me well enough to be very competitive, made me think of something innovative and new and that hadn't been done before. And the reason for that, like slight sort of competitive nature in there, is because there's a display team and there's a classified team. And I was in the classified team selling small ads in the back of the magazine. I then took it upon myself to become a display advertising guru in the classified area by deciding to ring up every single Volvo dealer and think about getting every dealership to agree to pay a nominal amount of money and be on the same double page spread together. Ooh. Rather than simply phoning up a few of them and going, hey, Volvos might get mentioned in this magazine. Do you want a standard classified spread? So
okay, time out, right? Right away. Were you stepping on the toes of those in the display department who are calling on these dealers, or was this still your account list per se?
Still, that's a fair question, and it's actually still my account list, but it's the space in the magazine.
Okay.
But the space you could always increase by making the magazine bigger. They were talking to Volvo as at a brand level, and they would always get a very sort of brand-led page inserted into the magazine or double page. I was going to the individual dealers who I would speak to at that level, but deciding why not combine a whole bunch of them, and it made the advertising proposition more attractive for them because it wasn't just one single ad, maybe a few of you do it. It's like, hey, we can put this into a new design, a new format. So with creativity is one skill, but I would definitely add perseverance, because having to then, for the very first time, get minimum of 15 of them all to agree to the same plan, which had never been done before, meant that you were having to keep calling them back and going, oh, do you know what? If it was only, if you were reliant on dealer X down the road doing it, now they've said they are in, will you say that you're in? So there was a lot of that going on. And I know some of the tales that people are telling on your MySalesDay podcast is around what that meant at the end as well. And it also did mean that my quota for that week or for that month was blown out of the water, because suddenly I've got this double page where the yield is 10 times what it should be on the size of the ads that I'm selling.
How much internal selling did you have to do on that one? Or was it where the management just said, hey, brilliant, go for it, and here's all the resources you need?
They were up for it. So my immediate manager was massively up for it. And I reckon there was a little bit of doubt in there of, it's unlikely that you're going to pull this off and that you'll get enough people to say yes, that it will happen. The elements which you don't realize when you're a young, enthusiastic sales guy, and maybe further on in the future, you think, do you know what my boss at the time probably did have to do was some internal selling, going to the display team going, hey, by the way, there's going to be this double page thing about Volvo dealers in the classified section. Hope that doesn't impact on your ability to sell Volvo as the overall client still at the brand level.
Or maybe it does. Or maybe it does. Maybe it does help. Who knows? I love that story. Had I heard that when you and I were working together, I would have given you like much more responsibility, because I didn't realize you were. I knew you were competitive. I didn't realize you were that ambitious. No, I'm teasing, of course. And for those listening, you figured out by now, Lawrence and I are good friends, and we've worked together and been through many wars together. I don't just hear competitiveness, which you bring up right away. I hear creativity, but most important, Lawrence, I will say and congratulate you, that's ambitious. That's pure ambition at an early age, not putting a fence around what you think you can go for. So congratulations.
It felt quite good at the time. It was that like 2 minutes of celebrity, because you're within an organization, you're all selling these small ads that are worth, the yield is X, and suddenly it's like, right, for this particular week, people are going to look in the back of that magazine, and for the first time ever, they're going to see something that looks like a front half ad, but in the back section, sold by one guy. And it's like, oh, how long can I take the plaudits on that one?
Well, like I said, it was creative, and you followed something that's a real basic rule in marketing, which is when you cluster like-minded retailers or sellers together, you are creating more desire and more demand for everybody. A lot of people who read the MySalesDay newsletter get to the oomph section, where most of the time I'm trying to offer some levity in the form of some sort of a movie clip that reinforces that skill idea for the day. But a few weeks or maybe months ago, I actually put in a clip that speaks exactly to this particular kind of notion from a marketing perspective, which is why, when you drive down the road, you see 3 gas stations on 4 corners. Why do you see fast food restaurants all clustered together? Why do you go down Auto Row? And it is, of course, a very, very basic principle in marketing. You're maximizing yield amongst shoppers. You're making it easy for them to shop. And hey, it's up to each individual owner at that point to prove differentiation, why you should buy a Volvo versus a Saab, or, well, that's a dead car, versus a Lexus versus
reference there. I like
yeah,
that.
yeah, shows you how old I am.
There'll be many listeners who don't know what you're talking about.
Exactly. Good story. Thank you, and congratulations. Lot of good skills there for sure. All right, let's get into the meat, which is skills. The skills portion. We talked about meeting management. Again, I think that's a little bit kind of an overarching phrase or title for this segment. What is your motivation, though, to talk about this? Let's start there, because I tasked you with, hey, Lawrence, what do you want to talk about? What skills do you want to focus on? So what was the driver there? Something obviously hit you, and you're like, I want to talk about conversation management.
Well, now the secret's out that we work together. I would actually reference when we did work together at Say Media that I think that was the period in my sales career which cemented the importance of storytelling, which in a bracket behind that you can call it consultative selling.
Sure.
And the importance of going from being a rich media sales company to the early adoption of like influencer marketing, which is what we were doing. You do actually have to tell a story to gain credibility. And I think what we're talking about is in terms of management of not just what you're verbalizing within a meeting and what's coming out of your mouth and what you're presenting, and we'll come on to that in a minute around what you should present, what you shouldn't. It's about gaining that trust and that credibility through storytelling. But there are so many precursors to telling that story.
Yeah.
To be able to manage that meeting correctly.
Talk about that. Talk about that right now. Okay. What are those factors that you think are really important for us to be sensitive to?
So it's no secret you love an agenda, Mr. Hess. I remember in Say Media there was a particular habitual regularity of agenda setting, and depending on the nuance and the culture of the market in which you're selling, you're a salesperson in, how aggressive, if that's the right word, can you be about setting an agenda? But I do think it's the question part of a preamble at a meeting, right? And again, we don't want to go into too many sort of cliches, but the 2 of these and 1 of these, if you understand what it is that your customer wants to hear, then your story will resonate, because there is no point going in and telling a story if you don't know what the outcome of that story is going to be, and if the person wanted to hear it in the first place. Yeah,
good point. Well, guilty as charged with agendas. I am a fundamentalist at heart and in my soul when it comes to sales skills and applications. I fall in love with techniques that work. And that's why I taught it so vigorously. And I just have never seen a seller succeed as well when they're free-forming or winging it versus when there's some structure to what they're thinking about. The other thing I think you and I have to really acknowledge You and I worked together, what's going on now, I think 72 years ago. We look great for our age, right? It is even
That's because
hard.
you're 90. You
Exactly.
started early.
How do you know how I feel when I wake up? Number one, getting a meeting is as hard as it's ever been. Number two, we have less meetings today than we had
Hmm.
last year, than we had in 2024, than we had in 2023. Heck, when you and I were working together 10, 15, 20 years ago, we could knock out easy, what, 10 meetings a week? Face-to-face meetings, right? Those days are gone. Number one, we
It
don't
was
get as many.
quicker to get a meeting. When you could phone somebody up, it was quicker to get a meeting than it is emailing somebody and waiting for a reply.
Yeah. Well,
That's
there's also
fundamentally what's.
because of automation in our industry and in other industries, there's also less buyers to make
Mm,
decisions, and there's more sellers because there's more startups and more models, et cetera, et cetera. So we understand the dynamics of why it is, but I think the biggest game changer is that what we're doing right now, videoing and doing an audio recording of a podcast, reminds us that this is how people are selling right now. They're selling over video.
yeah.
And that requires intense precision, in my opinion, on how you manage the meeting. Talk to me about how you've learned that in the last 10 years as video has become more prevalent. How have you learned better, more acute meeting management skills and conversation management skills?
I mean, it's the toughest part of that is that if you imagine presenting and around the management, the meeting management, let me reference one of your recent stories, and also when you had Stephanie from Magnite on your podcast
Yeah.
around not using decks anymore. So if you imagine trying to do that in person, that's one thing, but doing it when you're doing it remotely on a video call, that's completely another. Because how do you gauge how interested the audience is and how much they're listening? And even if you use one of the tools where Google Hangouts is not as good as Zoom at being able to see everybody who's on the call with
Right.
you, and
Right.
then you try looking at their eyes to see if they're looking down or up or sideways whilst you're presenting to them. And I've seen a lot of sellers be guilty of this in my career, where they hide behind a presentation, and it's sometimes it's not their fault. They've been trained
Right.
on that presentation. They've been told they've got to get meetings to go and present that presentation, so you're expected to deliver that presentation.
Right.
But you do not have to feel you've got to go end to end. And so if you're in a meeting, and this happened, absolute truth of a story, in Publicis, selling to a couple of senior clients that I had in the room, but also some junior people on a particular account. And the seller on my team who was in there was presenting. Very smart seller, really knew their stuff. Spoke very fast, but had this like unbelievable urge to get through the deck. And at one
Mm,
point, I had to stop the presentation to ask the senior customer in the room for a little bit more depth and detail around what it is that they're trying to achieve, so that we can understand which products and services we're offering them that are going to be relevant. And before he could answer, I got cut off as my salesperson went back to the deck, like with this
oh,
insistent need to continue and get to the end. And you're like, we've got to listen to what this guy's got to say.
well, that's a training issue. That's a prep issue. That's why agendas are
Yeah.
important. That's why going through what is your role, what is my role in this meeting, how are we going to do this? I have to be honest, I started the agenda setting and the agenda establishment practice well before you and I got together, because I worked with a sales team that was horrible on the discovery phase. And that's what you're talking about, the discovery phase
Yeah.
of trying to understand, hey, where are we with where you sit? What do you care about? What are your immediate urgent, issues, et cetera? I think the hard part today is not only do we have fewer and fewer meetings with buyers, but we have less time in those meetings. And so we kind of feel the urge that we have to get our pitch out, when in actuality we have to be more consultative, and we probably have to do more questioning. And now a word from our sponsor. What a coincidence. Today's My Sales Day podcast sponsor is the My Sales Day newsletter. If you're enjoying the show and you want frequent, directional, and inspirational selling ideas, then the My Sales Day newsletter is for you. If I told you that going to the skills gym each day would cost you only 2 minutes of attention, you would sign up in a second. That's the premise of the newsletter. Early each morning, a punchy, action-oriented skill reco comes to your box, focusing you for the day. Who doesn't have 2 minutes to work on their skill development and career growth? The risk of not subscribing to My Sales Day might seem insignificant until you imagine your competitors reading it. Get an edge. Put in the time. Head to mysalesday.io after this show. Or heck, why wait? Pause the show, head over to mysalesday.io and subscribe. Better habits, better selling. Now, here's one for us to debate. At what point do you think, let's set the stage. Let's say there's a 25-minute meeting. You know you got 25 minutes, which means, by the way, that you got about 3 minutes for pleasantries, 3 minutes to close the meeting and figure out what to-dos are next, action items, where you go from there. Prior to the ending of the 3 minutes, you've got to qualify to find out if you move the needle. Do you have any kind of reaction or buy signs and or acknowledgement from the buyer? So you're eating away at the time when you look at it as a pie. If you looked at the meeting time in a pie chart, how much time up front do you give to asking questions before you feel that the buyer gets really agitated and they want to hear you share what the solutions could be or what the promise could be of your offering?
It's an interesting question, because I have been in situations where the passion for understanding from the client and from the customer what it is that they want and what's important to them does take over to some extent. And if you've done 10 minutes of that, you can see them getting slightly itchy around, hang on, is it just for me to answer your questions?
Yeah.
Are you not going to sell me anything? Because they're also in this cycle, right, where we train salespeople to go through a sales presentation and sell the product. They're also trained to sit there and receive it. So if they don't receive it, they start feeling like there's something going wrong. So we do have that moment where you have to understand, on the time management perspective, how you can actually deliver the right solution for them, tailored to them, but at the same time having established that it's going to land. And I think an evolution of your agenda from 50 years ago is that if you start it with, here are the 3 points I'm going to cover in this meeting, how does that sound to you? That's a very, very quick opener in terms of agenda. And you only have to have it written in your notebook so they can see that you've genuinely thought about it and written down, here are the action item, here are the topics we're going to discuss. Does that sound good to you? And if they say yes, then you say, well, I just have like a couple of questions for you. You ask those, you write those down, and that's it, right? You could be done in under 5 minutes, and then you can go into sales, and then you've got like feedback session at the end.
Just today, as you and I record this on January 13, the My Sales Day podcast that is featured will be about AI. And we have the very esteemed Jason Tsai, who is a senior executive at a company called Pivotal, who, by the way, lives in London as well. So he's geo-convenient for you if you guys want to meet up and talk about tactics. But one of the things that he is really hitting hard is enabling sales teams to use AI for all of the tactical answers to their questions, so they don't have to gobble up time in the meeting. And it just goes back to, you can't ask the same questions that you asked even a year ago in your interactions with customers when it's out there ready for AI to go get the answers for you. You got to be now smart about how AI is going to prep you. And I also think we would be remiss if we didn't mention that those agendas have to be built and sent prior to the meeting to the buyer. So you can get that alignment, and perhaps some of the questions that you have, they can answer. I've seen some buyers come back before the meeting and say, here's a couple answers, or here's a white paper, or here's something that you should read that's going to prep you for a strategic conversation?
A way that I love to do that, and it's almost to test them out, is that many people don't read emails. So if you were to get the meeting in, you confirm it, but then you send them an email going, hey, this is what we're going to discuss. Will you turn up in the meeting and they've read that email? Possibly not. So
Good
what
point.
you do is you write the 3 agenda items or the topics you're going to cover, which you will have in your book ready, just put them in bullet point form within the meeting invite.
Yeah,
so it goes in the calendar. And of course, no
I won't read that.
consultative seller is ever going to sit in the meeting and say, oh, that means you didn't read the points that I put in the calendar invite because you've just asked me a question that makes it obvious you didn't, because you clearly don't want them to look stupid. But sometimes, and it happens very infrequently, the appreciation that I've had for putting those in that sort of invite format from those who are clearly diligent enough in order to realize that they're there is quite refreshing. And you feel like, do you know what? It feels like a grown-up meeting. I put the agenda points in there 2 weeks ago when I sent the calendar invite. They've actually looked at them, and now we can have a proper grown-up discussion.
So we, of course, have not qualified that this noted meeting that we are referencing is a standard meeting. You and I have all sorts of different types of meetings, and so we understand that there's variables that dictate how we, back to the topic, manage the conversation. What are some other musts from Lawrence Horne that you go into a meeting and you say, these are the facts about how I got to manage this conversation with your remaining 10 minutes of time that you got from the buyer?
Yes, well, exactly that. I think it's back to the sort of storytelling and this trust component. How do you gain that trust? And it is by speaking honestly, but in being honest, you've actually got to be speaking like a real human being. To reference somebody else who I worked with back in the day that we worked together, my lovely boss at the time was called Paps at Say Media. And I mean,
shout out Paps.
Absolutely right. And one expression that has stayed with me forever was that he used to say that we're in the people business. We're selling rich media to agencies and to clients direct and solutions, etc., improving their advertising. But we are in the people business. Yeah. So if you treat everybody who you're talking to as a customer like a person, like a human individual, then you will talk to them normally. And I think if you eradicate the sort of cliches and thinking, I will sound smarter if I keep saying ROAS and business outcomes, then that means that I feel empowered because I'm so intelligent. I'm using all the marketing speak that you will read about in Campaign online. Then actually it cuts through that and you really start to gain trust because you're not just saying the words that everybody thinks that they need to hear that supposedly make you sound more intelligent. Does that make sense? It
makes perfect sense. How did you, as you grew your career and you got into the position of being a mentor to many other sellers, both in a direct and indirect manner? I mean, you've been a manager and you've molded careers and people. How did you help them get through, for many of them, that dependency on whether it's a script or not just a script, it's talking the way they think they should be talking versus just be a human. How did you coach that? How did you teach that?
It actually goes back to before the world in which we now find ourselves, where desk phones are non-existent and people do not call each other up on a telephone from seller to client. And now it's just simply via email. That's the only way of communicating. But way before that, even when we did have phones, email was an incredibly important component as to how we then follow up or send over important documents. And I, for a very, very long time in my career, have believed in the power of a great email. And so quite often I've sat with salespeople who I'm trying to coach and mentor, and through the it's not a script, but through coaching them how to create a great email, make it more succinct, make it to the point, really get the inflection right, eloquent use of language, get all the grammar right. So it genuinely is a very, very good and compelling email. I think through coaching, the power of a great email, you can actually help them develop their communication skills, which then go through into sort of face-to-face meetings.
So when you embarked on this strategy, did you find that their emails were very antiseptic and very formulaic, and you were trying to coach more human language into them? Is that the point that you're making?
I tell you, there was an element of all of that, but also that's the component you don't see. In the old versions of sales rooms, or sales floors, you would hear each other on the phone.
Yeah.
It creates a great dynamic within the environment, and the old school of some people stand up, others sit down, but you hear how people are selling, which is great. But you don't actually hear people sending their emails. And you're not going to track all of them and say, hey, you have to copy me on every single email you send. So occasionally when a seller comes to you for a bit of advice, hey, I'm trying to unpick a problem here, and I need to send over quite a grown-up email to this person because they've become involved in this problem that's happened or that surfaced. Can you help me write this email? You then get an insight into, blimey, if this is the perfect email you're crafting and it's this poor quality, what do your day-to-day communication emails look like?
Not only that, but there is a difference between how you're presenting yourself and communicating through email versus your verbal skills. I do not hide my disdain for email when I write my newsletter, MySalesDay. I hate email. I cannot stand it as a selling tool. I feel most sellers, this is where I'm getting a little hot, and that's okay. I feel most sellers depend on it, and they sit back and they think it's a good selling tool, when in effect, it's the easiest thing for a buyer to ignore. Now, most senior sellers are listening right now and they're going, yeah, I got that. Email is a utility device. Lawrence, are you free next Thursday for lunch? Yes or no? Do you want to go to the Hog's Breath Pub? Yes or no? That's a utility device. Lawrence, here's a proposal, and it's to you and 4 teammates. If you recall, you probably don't remember this, but the first 2 weeks that you were at Say Media, you had to send BCCs of your emails to Paps to look at. You probably don't remember that. Maybe he didn't do it. I had every manager do that because I wanted them to see how they were representing the story, the narrative, how they were talking about the value prop. But also I was managing for brevity and clarity versus too much, right? And I was just basically challenging the manager to get involved to help coach the seller. You can't send that kind of an email. You won't get a response. Too long, too formulaic, too cliche. Let's pivot. We're in violent agreement. That was a soapbox stand I stood on. So I know we're in violent agreement there. I want to get back to storytelling.
But how do we as an industry sort of measure that? Because effective meetings and effective phone calls have always been measured. But
well, you're right. You're right. That's
difficult to measure.
You're right. And I back up and I say, just because I hate email doesn't mean that I don't use it, doesn't mean that I don't push myself to write good emails. I would just rather somebody, I think to your point, be more of a human with their email and remove the cliches, remove the salesmanship, remove the length, be brief and clear, be clear with your intent. Because think about it, most people are reading it on their phone. So if it's more than 10 seconds, it looks like a James Joyce novel. Right?
Exactly.
Yeah. So
to the end behavior.
So email obviously takes a place, but if you listen to the podcast today by Jason Sy and myself, he'll talk to you about all the tools out there that will help you craft emails at scale and customize them. And then you're just in a fishing exhibition. Does that work for the listeners out there who are in true consultative selling? What if we have listeners here who work for AWS or they're selling Google Cloud? Shout out Keith Butler. buddy of ours, Keith.
Yes, very much so.
He sells Google. He's not using email as a prospecting device. He's not using email as a selling device. He knows he's got to get face to face with someone. So he's drifting more towards email as a utility device. I don't want to lose sight, however, of a thread that I think is really important, which you're on. When you mentioned earlier, and you referenced Stephanie Russell, shout out again to Stephanie, and that was a great podcast, and she did bring up the concept of no decks. That puts pressure on people to have a conversation. How did you evolve in your sales career to the point where you could throw away the script? And mind you, we were script oriented at Say Media because we were in a very innovative, how's that for my UK pronunciation? We were in an innovative mode, selling something that nobody had seen before, nobody had done before. So it did have to be scripted the first couple of years. And then after that, we were in solution selling mode. But how did you evolve to feel confident to throw away the scripts and just talk like a human being? How'd you do that? What advice do you have for the people out there who are struggling?
Well, fortunately, Michael, we are all friends here, so we could admit to things such as going off grid slightly because we were across the pond in the UK in Say Media days. And when we were such consummate professionals at selling what we knew as our Say Media product, we could actually go no deck because we got to a place where we had a rich media portfolio of previous ads, and we could even produce mock-ups. And you could talk to a client, ask what it is they're trying to achieve and what the business outcomes are for that particular campaign or that particular client, and then say, do you know what? I've got some live examples, case studies call them, but they were just live links.
Yeah.
And I can show you, bring them up on my laptop right now and just give you a demo of the product. And then at the end of that, you say, how does this fit the objectives and what you're trying to achieve for your client? And you walk away understanding whether that was a good fit. And that can, and on occasion did happen, without a single PowerPoint or keynote slide.
Yeah. The show and tell strategy. And by the way, let's not cheapen it. It is a case study. It is sharing of a story of, hey, you're Taco Bell. Let me show you what McDonald's did when they were trying to sell their Happy Meal deals, for the summer, blah, blah, blah. It did spur conversation, and I feel that that's really where selling is, whether it's digital media, digital advertising, or anything that is being sold out there, is how do we glorify the story for the customer? And if we are sitting back waiting for our solutions team to put together case studies and polish them for our customers, we are doing the wrong thing as sellers. We have to learn that skill ourselves.
And if you get the right person in the room, again, you could go no deck, because you can say, right, we've just discussed what's important to you, where the background is of the business that I work for and what we're trying to achieve and how we can help you in those goals. Now, let me just go straight into the platform and even allow you to just have a little play around, and you can see how simple it is. So again, that's rather like a case study, but it's because everybody now has some kind of home-built platform that a proprietary platform that they operate from.
Yeah, good point. You also bring up something I think that's really important. Every seller feels the pressure from senior leadership and that they put on themselves to go higher up the chain on the buy side. And of course, we talk about it in the newsletter a lot regarding champion development. And when you think about what your champions want, they want stories. They don't want scripts. They don't want decks. In fact, you and I know you cannot pull out a deck to somebody who is a promising champion or already a champion. You can't do that. That's not how you sell. You sell with questions. You sell with examples, with case studies.
That raises an interesting point as well, which I hope is remotely educational for people who are listening, which is depending on who's in the room, that's very much around how you tailor the presentation. So sometimes, and I hope this has been the case, as a senior leader of a commercial business, you take somebody within your team to a meeting that you've set up with somebody more senior, and they realize that although you've got the same 15 slide presentation in the locker, that it's so much more of a conversational meeting that what you do at one point is you say, hey, look, let's just stick to the script to some extent. There are a couple of slides I just want to show you, and you dig in and you go straight in at like slide 5, and you present to slide 8, and then you come out again, and you realize that just navigating a couple of slides rather than all 15 is generally how more senior level meetings happen, because there is no way in hell you can just say, hey, I've asked you 2 questions. Okay, now sit there, don't say anything. I'm going to present slide 1 to 15, and then at the end go, how do you like that?
I think that's a great point, and that's still using visuals to break up the monotony of a discussion, to illustrate a point, to explain something that is better with pictures, let's face it, or better with live action. It also brings up another issue which you and I faced numerous times in our career selling together and since then, which is, let's say you're lucky enough to have an in-person meeting and you got 3 or 4 or 5 or 8 people in the room. I think a lot of sellers oftentimes get nervous on where's my approach? And my answer is, you are always talking to the senior most person in the room. Everybody else can catch up. It doesn't mean you're leaving them behind. It doesn't mean you're not engaging them in the meeting. It doesn't mean you're not, worried about their participation or engagement, but you are selling to the top in that room. And I think sometimes a lot of sellers either forget that, or they're worried about placating too many people in the room that they forget about selling to the senior person. But it also changes their strategy, where they may rely on the deck because they're a little nervous. They got 8 people in the room, and the deck is a crutch. There's a great book that I hit a lot that I talk about when I hit storytelling in MySalesDay by an ex-P&G product manager named Paul Smith. He's written a couple books on storytelling, and he tells a great story about how in his first P&G meeting with CEO Lafley, he goes into the meeting and he sets up and he's preparing his deck forever, and he sits down in the spot where he thinks he should be, and it turns out when all the senior brass comes in, including the CEO, he's positioned under the screen. And it would be awkward he doesn't know this. For some reason, he doesn't know this. I don't know the details of the story. But basically, Lafley turns to him, the CEO, and just says, no deck, just talk to me. Now, fortunately, he put in so much time to the deck creation where that became his story and he didn't need the slides. But he points out that slides are a crutch for the seller, not an aid for the buyer.
The only piece I'd add to that is, and you're kind of depicting a bit of a lunch and learn situation, which happens a lot of the time when you've got a dozen people in the room. Occasionally what you need, and hopefully that gives you the little bit of feedback that you need as a seller, is you need the senior person in the room to be a bit of a peacock, and you want them to fluff out their feathers and say, I'm going to be the one who asks questions. Or in some cases that could go badly because they really, really dig in and they really don't let you off the hook, and they try and sort of make you slip up by asking questions. But on occasion, it can be somebody who still wants everybody, including their peers, to know that they're the senior person in the room, but they're the ones who give sort of feedback and conversational points throughout that meeting. And then you feel that you're not just stranded, because otherwise, and we've all probably been there, you're presenting to 12 people in the room.
Yes.
And you're just longing for somebody to give some kind of a reaction or a bit of speech, and you're getting nothing.
Or even worse, you make a bad assumption that the people with power are not with power, and vice versa. You had mentioned that you listened to the Paul Kassar podcast that I did, which was incredibly fun for us, just because he is like you, close to me, and we have so many war stories. Do you recall that story that we told? We tried to squeeze it into the podcast, but basically Paul and I and Mike Weber, shout out to Mike, somebody else I'm trying to get on the show. We went into a pitch meeting in Toronto with 4 people, and the 3 of us were clicking with the 3 senior people in the room, and there was this 4th guy who was kind of in a corner, and he was not engaged. He was not amused by our jokes, by our joking, by our frivolity. And he threw us under the bus after that meeting on social media, to the point where Troy, our president of the company, within 2 minutes after the meeting, texted us and said, what the hell happened in that meeting? In other words, we made assumptions that
Yeah.
that were wrong on who should be catered to and targeted and engaged in the meeting, and we didn't map our energy to that person, et cetera, et cetera. I want to end with turbulence because you have so much experience dealing with pressure, dealing with the stressors of the sales life. What does Lawrence do personally to deal with the turbulence of the sales life? What recommendations do you have for our listeners?
The pressure, I mean, you've just alluded to it right there, is that in sales, and I think you open the MySalesDay intro all the time with the same concept that there is that reset. And so you have a 12-month period and there are lots of different emotions that flow around. You get halfway through the year, it's tracking well, not so well. You think you can catch up, high pressure at the end. Hopefully all the targets are met. And then you get to January and it's, you're only as good as yesterday. And yesterday was no longer December, it's now January. So that does create a unique pressure in a sales environment, really, because you have that kind of reset. And look, being transparent, clearly I haven't been in the industry for 75 years like you, but we both have become both health and age conscious, and we've both also very much loved sport, and for me, and I know it has been the same for you, to deal with that pressure, the clarity of mindset which you get for work through staying active and living a healthy lifestyle. Yes, you enjoy the sport and you enjoy the competitiveness because it ticks various boxes for you as a human being, but also it gives you that energy and that clarity of thought for work. And that's before you even get into then chucking saunas and ice baths into it to try and get yourself in the right headspace.
Yeah.
But I mean, seriously, it actually goes back to that reference back to Paps, and big shout out to Paps again about being in the people business. So if you surround yourself in the working environment with good people, not only does it mean that you get the job done more effectively and hopefully you meet those stressful sales targets that you've got to achieve because you've got good people doing the job, but the place where you spend most of your time, energy, and focus, which is work, becomes that much more easier to deal with because you've got good people that you're doing it with and you enjoy the process.
Well, you were always a good citizen with a great attitude, with a great sense of contributing to culture. And I mean that earnestly. I always was very impressed by your energy and your enthusiasm for what you do and the pride that you took into each day. I do want to point out for the listener out there that for those types of people that you see, like Lawrence, and everybody has a Lawrence in their lives, it's not always easy and it's not always natural. So kudos to you for making it look natural, because a good attitude is not just innate. It's something that we have to work on.
It's a tiring aspect as well. It's only as you get a bit older you realize that having to be the energetic person in the room as well, there is that pressure which maybe you don't sit down and think about, but it just comes naturally as part of the role that you're playing within that sales organization. And you realize trying to be inspirational and make sure that you're keeping the energy levels up on behalf of everybody else, but also for yourself. Then there are moments where you reflect and go, blimey, maybe being like that does take its toll occasionally. You just need to take a bit of a rest and time out. But I think regardless of whether it is innately within your DNA, I think something that you've been talking about the whole way through this session, but also previously within MySalesDay, is being prepared. And so if you ask clients about their business, a few small expressions like, what's important to you? How can we help you? How can I be a better solution for what it is that you're looking for? They're preparing for the future too, so they can give you real insight and they can really help you do what you're doing. And then both parties know their stuff. And I think that just helps gain the confidence, even if it's not naturally there, perhaps.
Yeah, and if that investment is authentic and that curiosity is genuine, then it feeds us too and it empowers us too. So I love it. A good place to stop. But we still want to not just let you go because you got to go to bed at some point, although it's still early there. But it is time for me to remind the listener why you joined the show today and why you listened. And it's very simple. You're trying to be the best sales professional that you can be, and we appreciate that. That's why we do the show. Even if it's a little thing that you picked up today from Lawrence or by reading the MySalesDay newsletter, it could make a huge difference in your selling. But you hear me say this every time I do the podcast, and I will keep saying it. Your mind has got to be open, and you got to put in the work. Lawrence, this was fun. Thank you for joining us.
It was fun. It's been a privilege to hear your voice for an extended period of time rather than it being in our sort of brief, fleeting conversational moments. So
Exactly.
awesome hanging out with you again.
Thank you, buddy. And for you and everyone, remember, better habits equal better selling. Outstanding.
Is that all right?
Awesome. Thank you for listening to My Sales Day. It was great having you here. For more, listen to our other episodes on your favorite podcast platform. And while you're there, leave us a review. I care what you think. And because I'm a seller like you, I got thick skin, so I can take anything you got. You can also visit mysalesday.io to join our email list and community dedicated to sellers just like you. My Sales Day is a podcast by sellers for sellers. And if you got something out of today's episode, help out a friend by sharing this episode with them. My Sales Day is proudly produced in partnership with Westport Studios. Views and opinions expressed by guests on My Sales Day are their own and may not reflect the views and opinions of their organization. Start your sales day the right way with My Sales Day. I'll see you in our next episode and in the daily newsletter.